Good evening to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our evening update on Tropical Storm Debby. Debby now named as a tropical storm this evening, as of the latest National Hurricane Center advisory. Hurricane warnings are up in effect for the Big Bend area of Florida, and we're watching as well the potential for a huge flood risk across portions of the southeast, including the Carolinas and Florida, once Debby makes landfall. We're going to talk about all of that, including what to expect in terms of impacts and intensity for Debby as it approaches Florida this evening. Lots to go over. Let's start off, though, with the current information by the National Hurricane Center as of 8 o'clock from the advisory that was released not long ago. Debby is still a weak tropical storm. Maximum sustained winds right now at 40 miles per hour with a minimum central pressure of 1,005 millibars. Recon is in the storm right now, getting more information on what the intensity is, but based on data that I've seen so far, it doesn't look like it is too different than what the National Hurricane Center has as its intensity right now. It is located, if you're tracking it on a map, at 24.1 north, 83.3 west, and the movement is northwest right now at 14 miles an hour. And once again, we are looking at hurricane warnings in effect for portions of the panhandle of Florida, as this could potentially become a hurricane as it approaches Florida, especially the Big Bend area on Monday. And with the latest advisory, once again, they say Air Force Reserve, NOAA hurricane hunters en route to investigate Debby. They're already in it right now, getting more information. And there are already squalls spreading across the Florida Keys and the peninsula right now. And I think that is the biggest issue that we're going to see from Debby, regardless of how strong it becomes, is the rainfall from the storm. In fact, you could see, as mentioned by the National Hurricane Center, we already have rainfall that is spreading across the Florida peninsula. Rain totals throughout this area will be very high. And they'll likely not just be confined to Florida, too. We're looking at potentially an even bigger risk for flooding rains across the southeast as well, including Georgia and the Carolinas, but that's a little bit more down towards the future. But in terms of the satellite improvement right now with Debby, you could see has a pretty decent satellite image, definitely taking on a very cyclonic shape. It is organizing slowly, and it has very warm sea surface temperatures in the Gulf, combined with very favorable upper level winds. You could even see that on satellite just by looking at the satellite presentation alone. You could see upper level wind wise, this has a very favorable setup. Take a look at how all these clouds are fanning away from the storm. On basically all quadrants of the storm, we have outflow, which is represented by these fanning clouds. You could see even many, many miles away from the storm center, except on the northwestern side, and I believe that is probably because of a little bit of drier air in the north central Gulf. But besides that, this has a very favorable upper level pattern, and it's gonna be a pretty concerning situation, especially when it comes to intensity and the fact that this could become a hurricane once again as it approaches the Florida Panhandle on Monday. And just to look at the water vapor imagery, you could see lots of moisture associated with Debby, and that's going to mean lots of moisture in terms of rainfall amounts across Florida and the southeast. That also means environmentally conditions will be favorable for intensification as well. And once again, there's a little bit of dry air to the west of it, and that might be an inhibiting factor in terms of the intensity with Debby. That might be the only sort of inhibiting thing that we're looking at, especially because notice of how much moisture this has. You could see that Debby is also very broad. That might also hinder how strong it is able to get. But either way, regardless, all of this moisture is going to translate to very heavy rain totals across Florida and probably beyond that once Debby makes landfall in the northern panhandle, and it'll probably remain throughout the southeast well into next week. We're going to be dealing with Debby for several days across the southeast. It's not going to be like a storm that moves in and then moves on out and moves away to the northeast. It's going to be a storm that lingers around for probably a few days throughout this general region, and that is only going to mean very significant things when it comes to the flooding potential, things that we'll go over later on. But in terms of how favorable things will be for Debby before it makes landfall, it'll deal with very, very warm sea surface temperatures in the Gulf. In fact, it is already over very warm sea surface temperatures right now. You can even see from this chart, and it's a little bit misleading because the color scale is a little bit weird on this, but even these greens on the chart by this sea surface temperature chart by the NOAA NESDIS represents sea surface temperatures at least 29 or 30 degrees Celsius. And you can see by the 30 degrees Celsius isotherm, they are widespread throughout basically almost the entire Gulf, and especially the eastern part, the far eastern part of the Gulf, right near the western Florida coast where Debby will track. We see temperatures readings as much as 31 Celsius, and that translates to upper 80s to even lower 90s in Fahrenheit, and that is rocket fuel for intensification of storms. And as I mentioned as well, this will probably add extra moisture to the atmosphere too, which will probably translate to even more rainfall for Florida as well. So there's lots of things to be concerned about with Debby. And once again, you can even take a look at it by the National Hurricane Center cone. Tracks right through those very, very warm waters of the eastern Gulf. Hurricane landfall expected in the Big Bend Northern Peninsula kind of panhandle area. Seems like around late Monday morning into early Monday afternoon. Hurricane warnings are in effect. And then obviously beyond that, you could take a look at the day 4 and 5 time frame. Notice how the cone rapidly expands. That represents the uncertainty becomes very large for what Debby will do, especially given that it'll probably slow down dramatically. And as I said before, we'll probably be dealing with Debby for multiple days, well into next week. This will still be in the southeast, and that'll probably mean lots of bad things, especially when it comes to the flooding potential for this storm. But intensity-wise, at least, let's take a look at what the GFS shows. You could see how quickly this storm will probably get going, even though this only has about a day or so, or a day and a half roughly, over water. This is what the GFS shows. Debby rapidly organizes, and right up until landfall, the GFS shows 987 millibars, so that's probably a low-end hurricane as it makes landfall in the Panhandle. And then you could see once it makes landfall, it kind of just hangs out around the southeast, moves a little bit, and then it emerges off the southeast coast. And then you could see we're now at 4 days, and then we go into the 5-day time frame. Barely moves at all. And that just means lots of rain being pummeled across the southeast and the Carolinas and Georgia, and it's going to be over widespread areas too. And then you can even see beyond that over the next 7 days, it's still generally within the southeast area. Barely moves from the northern Big Bend area to just near the Carolinas. Within, what is that, 5 days, it generally remains within this area, this region of the United States. And once again, that's going to mean lots of rain for widespread areas. The flooding potential will be through the roof. And once again, it's looking like a really bad scenario from the rainfall, and that'll probably be the biggest thing that we take away from Debby. But intensity-wise too, though, the GFS, you could see it ramps up to the storm very quickly. Makes sense given how warm the waters are in the Gulf leading up until landfall. And we could even take a look at some of the hurricane models too that really, the hurricane models are the models that really pinpoint more on the intensity of a storm. And you can see the latest HWRF takes note of that. And in fact, let's actually see with the MSLP, that in fact is on the HWRF 984 millibars, so a hurricane on approach to the Panhandle as well, and then makes landfall, and then they kind of keep it remaining generally within that same region, just like what the other models are showing. It stalls out, and that'll probably be a big rainfall threat. And we can take a look at some of the other models too. The HMON as well, a little bit weaker but they also show some intensification occurring. They bring this to a strong tropical storm. And let's see what the HAFS models show. HAFS models kind of agreeing with the HWRF a little more. They take this closer to hurricane intensity. The bottom line is that given how warm the Gulf is, you could probably expect, especially if this has really, if this maintains development and it instead of and it intensifies very rapidly over those very warm waters of the Eastern Gulf, you could probably expect that Debby will become a hurricane before it makes landfall on the peninsula. And obviously, that'll mean lots of impacts in its own, especially for initial landfall. But once again, I really want to write home the potential rainfall threat that this could produce. This is the GFS out to the next 7 days in accumulated precipitation. And all of these areas that you see highlighted in the orange represent people that could see at least a foot, or if so, or if not more, of rain. And obviously, first of all, you could see how much rainfall we'll probably see across the Florida Peninsula. Just about everybody in Florida will get rain from Debby over the next several days. But beyond that, especially those that'll probably get as much as a foot, if not more, of rain over the southeast. It extends basically anywhere from northern Florida all the way up into the Carolinas as well. Once again, because of the potential that Debby will, once it moves in, it'll probably stall out and basically hang around the southeast for the next several days, well into next week. And the National Hurricane Center mentions it in its key messages as well. It's actually the first key message. Heavy rainfall will likely result in considerable flash flooding and urban flooding across portions of Florida and the coastal areas of the southeast this weekend through Thursday, so well into next week. And significant river flooding is expected too. Hurricane conditions are expected on Monday along portions of the Florida Big Bend region, where a hurricane warning is in effect, with tropical storm conditions beginning late Sunday. And then tropical storm conditions are expected through Monday far south within the tropical storm warning area along the Florida's west coast, including the Tampa Bay area and the lower Florida Keys. And we should also mention as well, yes, we'll have the rainfall, but this will probably still be a tropical storm as it affects the Carolinas too. So we also have the gusty wind aspect of that. And then we have the danger for life-threatening storm surge inundation along portions of the Gulf Coast of Florida, from Arapec to Indian Pass, and then life-threatening storm surge is possible south of Arapeca to Bonita Beach, including Tampa Bay and Charlotte Harbor. And this storm surge threat will probably be increased as well, depending on if Debby is able to strengthen quicker than the models expect, which is certainly possible, once again, given that the Gulf of Mexico is rocket fuel, basically, in terms of its heat and how warm the waters are. And once again, that's only going to help contribute to the flash flooding risk as well. It's the first key message on the National Hurricane Center, and you can see why. This is the flash flooding risk by the Weather Prediction Center over the next 5 days, and a good chunk of the southeast, including Georgia, northern Florida, and South Carolina, is in a moderate risk for flash flooding. So that means heavy rainfall over certain areas for long stretches of time, which will probably mean to flooding that could be very quick. That is why it's called flash flooding. And that, once again, and I should mention that flooding is the biggest risk when it comes to a hurricane. In fact, it's kind of been a part of why some of our most memorable hurricanes in recent history are as big as they are. Just look at storms like Harvey in 2017, Florence in 2018 in the Carolinas. Both were huge flooding risks, and huge, flood machines, basically, because of their rainfall. And even storms like Katrina, the biggest issue was flooding from storm surge along the Mississippi coast. Obviously, Katrina is is going to be much stronger that this storm will probably ever be able to be. But its biggest issue was flooding and rain. And it looks like that's going to be the issue, probably the biggest issue with this storm as well. And if you're not convinced yet, it is statistically proven that the biggest killer in a tropical cyclone is the flooding rain. So that is something to definitely take away from and be aware of with Debby over the next several days. Even if you're not going to be on the coast where you're going to experience the hurricane force winds, if Debby indeed strengthens to a hurricane, if you're inland, you're probably going to experience very heavy rain and all the flooding as well. So definitely keep that in mind. But if you are along the coast, obviously keep in mind the hurricane conditions that are possible, especially if you're in the Big Bend region. And with that, that'll probably come the storm surge too. Up to 7 feet is expected in portions of the Big Bend. Storm surge risk extends all the way down into basically into southwestern Florida. Probably the Keys will get a little bit of surge as well. But even Tampa as well. This storm is once again very huge in its influence, and you could already see that from the satellite picture earlier, where we already are having rainfall already being felt on the peninsula. There will be storm surge into the Tampa Bay as well. 2 to 4 feet. That's not crazy, but that is still significant enough that that'll probably cause some flooding and some issues for Tampa. So keep that in mind. But in terms of storm surge, that is another threat to keep in mind as well for when Debby makes landfall. And we'll probably also see storm surge issues along the Carolinas as well, especially if Debby emerges off the southeast coast, like some of the guidance is suggesting. That, though, is a little bit more uncertain because, once again, there's lots of uncertainty with what Debby will do after it makes landfall in the Big Bend area of Florida on Monday, given that this will probably slow down, if not even stall, over portions of Florida or the Southeast. And that, once again, will greatly contribute to the flooding risk. But with that being said, that also causes lots of uncertainty with track, which will also impact who will see the flooding too. So there's lots of things to still be ironed out with Debby. Lots of things to watch over the next several days, and we'll definitely be continuing to watch them very much so. Definitely lots of information to keep up with. And we'll probably do tomorrow here on YouTube, we'll probably do multiple videos and maybe even a live stream tomorrow as well to see how Debby progresses throughout tomorrow. And we'll probably do the same for Monday too. So if you're not subscribed yet to this channel, I would really appreciate it, especially if you found this video informative to you, to subscribe, like, comment your thoughts on Debby, comment any questions as well. And we'll definitely be watching Debby and how it progresses over the next several days. With that being said, thanks for watching. Stay safe. Have a blessed evening and hopefully a blessed day and a safe one as well tomorrow. Peace, love, and kindness to you all, and we'll be talking again for sure very, very soon.